CBT Nuggets JNCIA Series User Interface Options Part 1 Operational Mode. Okay, this is going to be one of two parts of a segment of this Nugget series where we're going to look at user interface options. This is actually one of the domains of the exam. When you take your exam and you walk out of there with your paper that says you passed, it'll have a domain and a percentage of user interface options. So we want to cover some of these, really low-level fundamentals. Now, as you know, we learned this in the previous Nugget. There's two modes. There's operational mode and there's configuration mode. So we're going to focus here. Actually, we'll do one thing at the root shell. That's the easy setup feature. We'll also look at CLI navigation. I'm going to give you a few things that we can do, some tips to get around the CLI. We'll do that in operational mode as well. Remember, operational mode has that symbol. And then we'll look at several aspects of operational mode. Now, as we're going to see this, there's quite a few commands that you can run in this mode. We're not going to do them all here because we have some more advanced areas coming up where we're going to do a look at file management, for example, and monitoring. Well, we want to wait till we get there, but we want to stay pretty much in the main commands of this operational mode: the show commands, the request commands, the restart commands, and then finally, and I'm going to do this about every 3 or 4 nuggets in this series, we'll take a breather, take a sidebar, and we'll do our testing takeaways. What have we talked about so far that you need to remember for the exam? Okay, so we'll do it the first in several installments of testing takeaways from Michael Shannon. All right, sound good? Well, let's dive in. Okay, remember the previous nugget when we were talking about the fact that we probably wouldn't be back on the switch again because the JNCIA doesn't really cover the switch? Well, it wasn't a bald-faced lie, but it's definitely not true because we're back on the switch. I thought of something, a feature that I don't use, and I rarely even think about this feature because, for example, on my Cisco routers, I never use the setup configuration dialog on a router. I always just kind of bypass that on a new router, a new config, and just go right into configuration. The same thing on a switch. Well, on the Juniper switch, there is a feature known as Easy Setup. Okay, Easy Setup. And basically it allows you to get your brand new switch kind of up and running, and it'll ask you through a configuration dialog for the basic information you need to, basically get this thing going. You launch Easy Setup from a root shell prompt like we see here when the factory default configuration is active, and that really is the situation right now. We're using the factory default configuration. No changes have been made to the system. And really, after you commit changes, it's very difficult to actually evoke the Easy Setup again. You would have to go into a config directory. You have to access it from the root shell, delete certain files, and then reboot the switch to kind of force it to load up an actual pristine factory config. There is a command that we're going to look at later on in this Nugget series that we need to know about called load factory-default. Well, that's not the same command, okay? It's not good enough. And so you get kind of one shot at this, really, unless you want to jump through a bunch of hoops. So here at the shell command, we would do Easy Setup and hit Enter. And we can see we've got the Easy Setup wizard, and it's going to help you configure the identity of the switch, okay? We can enter the system host name. So let's call it EX2200. A new root password, that's important, so let me put that in there. Okay. Enable Telnet service, that's interesting. In a production environment, you would say no here, okay? And look at the default setting. The default setting, by the way, is in square brackets. I want to go ahead and do this because I'm in a lab environment, so I'm going to go ahead and enable Telnet. I'd rather use that. Notice that Secure Shell, which is recommended, it's more secure, especially in a production enterprise environment. The default is yes. That's enabled by default. Okay. Then switch management. We have two options here. We can configure in-band management, where you would basically say interface, VLAN, whatever, and usually people will put like VLAN 99 for their management VLAN. Or you could configure out-of-band management on a management interface, which is known as ME0.0. Now, we haven't really talked about interfaces yet, so I don't want you to get hung up on that. But it goes back to earlier in the previous nugget when I had to, after I configured that router, I did have to go ahead and configure the management interface on gig E000 so I could actually access that device again later with JWeb if I wanted to. Kind of the same concept here. Notice the default option is to do in-band management. Now, a lot of folks are going to pick the first option. I'm going to go ahead and pick the second option because I have an out-of-band management VLAN, which is on another switch. So I'm going to go ahead and choose option number 2. And notice the IP address is 192.168.1.1. I don't want to use that address because it's obviously being used by something else, and I don't want this to be my management VLAN. Ultimately, my management VLAN is going to be 192.168.3, and I want to make this one something like .3, 3.3, with a 24-bit mask. If you don't know what that means you haven't been doing any of the homework on IP subnetting. That's okay, we'll learn about that later. The gateway address is basically the IP address of a gateway to get to a different network. Okay, so we'll say for me it's 192.168.3.1 is the gateway. Do we want to configure SNMP? Typically, I would go ahead and do this right off the bat because I want to get information generated immediately. But we're going to be doing this later on as part of our exercise and learning, so I'm going to go ahead and put in no there. I can also do the system time and date. That's optional. I think I'm going to go ahead and do that also at a later time. Again, what am I doing here? I'm just really kind of just showing you, this easy setup configuration. It may come up on the exam, okay? If not this exam, maybe on your next exam on the JNCIS, okay? But we can see now our configuration. EX2200 doesn't tell you the root password, enabled telnet, secure shell, the management IP address, the gateway, and we're using out-of-band management on management 00 interface. And then again, do we want to click on yes to commit the new configuration? If you say no, you can just come out of the wizard and we could go back in and configure from scratch. I think I'll go ahead and keep this configuration. Remember, like I said, if at some time in the future I want to kind of wipe this out and go back to the factory config, I can do that, but going back to the factory config with load factory-default will not allow me to come back through and use easy setup again. So this is kind of a one-time shot, but I'm going to go ahead and say yes. So we've used easy setup now to rapidly configure our EX series 2200 switch. Let's move along now and look at more aspects of operational mode. This was actually done not in operational mode, but at the root shell prompt, okay, or the %, okay? Now let's move down one level and look at operational mode. And we're going to focus pretty much here in user interface options part 1 on operation mode. And there we can see the commit was successful. Okay, now I type in CLI, and as you can see here, the name has changed, okay, EX2200. And here's a pretty important show command. It's called show configuration. Now I can just put in CONF and hit the tab key. It will complete it for me. And when I press enter, it's going to show me my configuration, but it's going to show me in the output of what we would call a script, in a script format. What we're seeing is these indentations are showing up. These show subordinate levels of our configuration hierarchy, okay? So, as you can see here, this will obviously show when the last commit was taken place, okay? In other words, we haven't committed this configuration yet. And we have the version number, and then so we're in the kind of the system hierarchy here. Now these curly braces or these curly brackets that you see here in this script, these are container statements, okay? You can have open containers or closed containers. So in this example right here, we've got system is a container, services is a container, okay, and other ones below that. Secure shell, syslog, these are container statements. Anything with a semicolon after it is what we call a leaf statement. Of course, we're going to end up here with the more statement. I'll show you a little bit later on how you can do this same kind of show command and do a no more, which means I don't want to stop at every page. Now I have to hit the space bar to see, again, I've seen, this is 22% of the configuration. So now it goes and shows me my interfaces, okay? Gigabit 000 or gig E 000, and just keep hitting the space bar and we can see all of our configuration. So show configuration shows this kind of script format. Fortunately, when you are configuring the device, you don't have to configure it according to this scripting methodology or this scripting language. We have other mechanisms that are more intuitive for us as administrators. There we go. So that's the show configuration command that we do in operational mode. Okay, let's clear the screen here. Okay, I think I'm done with my EX2200 switch, and you know, I'm not going to never say never. Well, I won't say we'll never be back here, but I'm going to go ahead and get back over and take a look at, let's see what sessions I have going here on my access switch. I've got, okay, that's the switch I was on. Let's go to router 1, so hit number 2 there. That's my 2350. I don't want that one. There we go, 2320. That's what I want to see. So 2320, and I'm at the operational mode prompt. One thing to remember about this CLI in Junos is that it's based on what we call Emacs style keystrokes. Let me just type that in there, Emacs. So if you've worked in Linux or Unix, and you know, even DOS or things like that, you know that you have the ability to move your cursor at different positions, or you can edit the command line with shortcuts. So there are some useful keystrokes that you might want to know. I'm going to tell you right now, probably not, you know, exam relevant too much, but if I want to do, let's say, show configuration, firewall, yeah, that's on there, family, iNet. Okay, this will make more sense to you later, but right now I'm going to get a little configuration going there. So I've got Control B. Control B moves me back 1 character, right? Control F, and trust me, that's what I'm doing, holding the control key down, moves me forward 1 character, so Control B back, Control F forward. If I do Control A, that moves my cursor to the beginning of the command line, so I could actually type NO in there. That's a good one to know, because often you want to, you can use the up arrow to kind of look at the history of your commands. If you want to do like the opposite of a command, and we do this all the time in the Cisco iOS, we just simply go to the front of the line and type in no, like no show configuration, which doesn't really apply here, but you get the idea. It moves to the beginning of the command line. To the end of the command line, Control E, and you can see now I'm at the end of the command line. If I want to delete all of the words from the cursor to the end of the line, so I could move back here and say, you know, I want to get rid of this, I could do boom. Okay, so Control K deleted that word iNet. If I want to delete an entire word to the left of the cursor, so Control W, that gets rid of the word family. If I want to delete or clear the entire line, Control X will do that. If I want to redraw that line, Control L should redo that, and it didn't do that. Okay, usually you can redraw it, but I can go back up and let's see if I can do something like that. Okay, so Control P is like an up arrow. Now the command that I typed out there, I didn't issue the command, so it's not really in the buffer. I just kind of typed it out there, so that wasn't really, you know, the best case. But you can do the up arrow. You can do Control N to go to previous commands that have been issued. They're in the history buffer. So those are some good, what we call Emacs keys. You can always find good references to those, you know, anywhere up on the internet or in any, you know, Juniper book if you use a Juniper book. So those are some good things to know before we go in and actually look at some of our main commands in operational mode. And we're going to really begin by just kind of putting in a question mark here at the operational mode prompt, and it shows our possible completions for operational mode. Now notice the question mark at the operational prompt gives me all the possible completions. What if I just wanted to see the possible completions that start with S? Okay, well I could do S question mark, and I could see save, set, show, SSH, and start. Kind of like that movie Duck, Dodge, Dip, Dive, and Dodge, or whatever. So I can see that. If I wanted to see all the ones that were R, you get the picture. So let me do set. This is interesting. Even though we're in operational mode, we can still do some things that configure our device, our router. Configuration mode isn't the only place you can configure things. So here I can configure my date. And by the way, you need to know this for the exam. It's not set clock, it's not set time, it's set date. Now, a couple of ways I can do this. I can do it manually, which is what I'm going to do here, or I could say, let's use network time protocol. We'll talk about network time protocol later on in this Nugget series. Let's go ahead and set the date manually. You can see the format right here where we have to do that. So let's go ahead and do that. Y. That's the year. So 2012, the month 02, the day, DD is the 11th day, the hour, this is the 19th hour of the day, minutes, we are 16 minutes after the 19th hour, and then we'll say 1 second after that. There we go. So Saturday, February 11th, there's our time, and then UTC 2012. Now you can also set time zones and all that, but I wanted to show you that you can actually set things and configure things in operational mode. Okay, let's go back to our prompt. Now we're going to be looking at some of these advanced things later on. As a matter of fact, we actually have a nugget called operational monitoring. Well, obviously, we'll be looking at things like monitor, to be specific. But the reason I like this area so much is especially, let me talk to you Cisco people there, people who understand Cisco, you CCNAs out there. There's some really interesting, unique commands here that you'd only find in Junos, okay? For example, things like request, okay? That's pretty cool, and test. These are some unique commands that you've never seen these before, okay? Now, clearing, we can clear information in our system. So if I wanted to clear out information on a process by process or daemon by daemon manner, I can see, let's do a question mark there, and you can see all the things I can clear, all these different information sets, okay? ARP information, DHCP information, interface information, so you can clear stuff out. So that's a command that might come in handy for us, okay? We don't have much to clear out right now, but anyway, we know that configure is going to get us into that edit mode. So we can type edit, we can also type configure to get to that prompt as well. We'll be looking at some file stuff. Help is interesting, okay? Help, something you probably want to use on a regular basis, okay? This actually takes you into an entire help software program, okay? The Junos Internet Software Command Line Interface help, okay, area. So it kind of goes through and it shows you just different commands, how you can use the help reference. So it's actually a little tutorial on using help. Now we're going to not worry about this right now, but I want to recommend to you that, as a, kind of as a sidebar, maybe as a little homework assignment, when you get into your particular router or your switch, or if you're using some GNS3 solution and some virtual software environment, go in and take a look at this file. Okay, so we have the help area. Some other commands that you would issue from this particular operational prompt or ping. This is the ICMP protocol. Okay, so ICMP is the Internet Control Management Protocol. I think that's what it stands for. Monitoring Protocol, Management Protocol. Very important protocol. Okay, it's used in IP version 4, it's used in IP version 6, and it allows you to do all different types of commands, but a ping is an echo request, echo reply. So I can ping some other device based on its IP address. So if I wanted to ping, let's say 192.168.1.1, I can see if I have reachability or connectability. Now I can tell you right now, I don't. This router, this 2320, is really kind of in standalone. I'm accessing it through the console, right, as I showed you in the diagram in the previous nugget, but it's not connected as part of any production LAN yet. Okay, we're moving step by step here, but I want to show you this. If I ping something, one thing that's interesting about Junos that you don't see in other operating systems, for example, like if you're pinging a Microsoft system or you're pinging in the router iOS from Cisco, it's just going to keep on going. Okay, so I'm getting an error message. This is the ICMP error message, but it'll ping continuously by default. Now there's commands I can do with the ping to say, how many do I want to send? And we'll talk more about that later on when we get into troubleshooting and stuff. But I have to actually do Control-C to break that. So I wanted to show you that for a couple of reasons. Number one, that the ping is a continuous ping by default. And number two, the Control key plus C. Okay, so I'll just say Control-C. That gets you out of there. Okay, so take note of that. I don't want you to freak out when you do a ping and you just can't, break out of it. I'm going to clear the screen from time to time, and many times I won't do it on the mic, so you'll just notice it'll be a clean screen here just for the sake of just clarity and better training. Okay, let's do some show commands at the operational prompt, and any command I show you. Okay, let me just, from here on out, if I show you a command, I'm not going to tell you that all the commands I show you are going to be on the exam, but I can pretty much guarantee you that any command that may show up on the exam, I'm going to show you. So that sounds convoluted, but just memorize and know every command I show you throughout this entire series. Okay, if you have to make flashcards, if you have to go through and practice in your own CLI, whatever you have to do. Okay, so one of the most common things we do in operational mode is do the show commands. Okay, we know that we can do a question mark, and there's a bunch of things we can do, different sub levels we can complete them. If I want to get to the end, Control C, I can do a show version command. Okay, this is the same command we have in Cisco, but you see a lot less here in the Junos. So we would see the host name, J2320, the model, what a coincidence, and my software release, 11.1R64. Should look familiar. That's the one we upgraded to in a previous nugget. Okay, so that's a good show command. You can also do a show configuration. And by the way, the tab key will complete it. And I can also say, well, what can I do with show configuration? A bunch of stuff. Okay, so bunch of config you can show. I might want to do show configuration interfaces. Okay, so hit a question mark. Here you can see I might want to see a particular interface name. Okay, I can add more to it. I could just run it like this, and it'll show me the script here. I've got two, GigE000, and again this is the IP address assigned to it, and it's been described as the management interface, and then a loopback interface. So not much done as far as configuration goes on this router. Again, we're building up to a exciting conclusion as we build this together. What else can I do? How about show log messages? That's one you want to know. And it's going to run and show log messages, over the last, hour or so as this has been going on. If we're concerned about how long the uptime is, and you can see there's some logon information there, root login information. I just do a Control C enter at any time. And by the way, that more thing, I'll show you later on how to not get the more. Okay, so show log messages. Okay, so check this out. If I go back and do a show interfaces command, okay, and I just hit enter, it's going to basically roll through all this information on each interface, starting with GigE000. Notice that it stops at the end of the page with the more. I have to hit the space bar, of course, and go down and see the next set of interfaces. A lot of interfaces that are built into this particular device. I'll Control C to get out of there. I can use a very popular command, and I'm going to be using this command tool a bunch throughout this entire series and moving on forward. It's the pipe symbol. Okay, the pipe symbol is the most powerful command tool really that you have in Junos. Okay, you basically take, let me just do this. I'll do an up arrow because that gets me to the previous command. You can see up arrow, down arrow. That's the command we're going to do. I do the pipe symbol. This is how this works. Let me just stop right here. Whatever's on the left hand side, okay, so obviously the output, I've already seen the output of show interfaces. I showed it to you, and one page at a time, all of the interfaces that are pretty much on this, available on this particular router. The pipe symbol basically says I'm going to redirect or pipe the output of the show interfaces command to something. Okay, so whatever's on the left hand side of the pipe is going to be input to the command I issue here, or it could be a file, okay, on the right hand side of the pipe. So one of the commands I could do is say I want to do show interfaces, but I want to pipe it, I want to send it to a no more function, or a no more command. And so I mentioned this several times. If I don't want to see the more, I just want to see all the commands and let them run, no paging one page at a time, boom, there we go. And now I'm just going to get physical interfaces, and I'm just going to keep on rolling. Now you can always do a Control C to stop that. Okay, that's one simple example of the pipe symbol. We're going to look at a lot of other examples, but I could do something like this. I could say, show configuration, right? Because we saw that. Oops, I gotta be more specific. Show configuration. I could now do my pipe symbol here, and this is a really prime example of where you're going to redirect the output of show configuration to something else. And what we typically do here, my friend, is we're going to pipe this to some type of constraint, okay? In other words, I want to pipe this and I want to say, I want to match something in show configuration, and then, follow it up with that. Or I can say, I want to pipe the configuration, but I want to show everything except for something else, right? Or I might say, I want to pipe it and I want to find something in particular. That makes sense. Or I can say, show me the last instance of something in the configuration. So I could say, show me the configuration and match gigabit Ethernet 000. Okay, and there you go. Condensed it quite a bit from the entire show configuration command. So that pipe symbol is very powerful. We'll be using that command tool a bunch for a wide variety of different processes. It's probably your most powerful tool, and you're probably already familiar with it. But there you go. I like it. Another command that might rear its head on the exam is the show interfaces extensive. Okay, extensive. And this is going to give you some extensive information. Now again, I could have done extensive pipe no more and just rolled it on out, but again, I want to go page by page, so I have the more in there. One of the things that you may have to know on the exam is you're looking for a command that's going to verify on a particular interface. For example, let's say gig E000. Let's look at more output here. Are there any active alarms going on? So yeah, here's an active alarm, a link alarm, which means basically there is no link to some other interface or some other router or some other device. So that's esoteric, that's kind of quirky. You can see, of course, lots of information here with this output. For example, you can look at traffic statistics. If I had traffic flowing on this interface, input, output in bytes and packets. But specifically, and again, this is kind of a test tip, how do you find active alarms on an interface? Well, show interfaces extensive. So we can, let's go ahead and Control C out of there. Something else that's on your device, your router, your switch, you need to know about is called the PIC, the PIC. That's the physical interface card. And it's basically a network interface specific card that could be installed on your router. So, another thing they might want you to know from Juniper is what command would you use to view the physical interface cards on your router along with the serial numbers. Okay, well, we've shown you that one already, but let's revisit it. Show hardware, sorry about that, show chassis hardware, right? Showed you this one. This is where I showed you the serial number of my chassis, but remember there's other things on your device besides the chassis. There's a serial number. Now I'm using just the first PIC, so these hardware components are numbered where 0 is the first one. So here's my first physical interface card, here's my first power supply. So obviously I could tell by looking at this, I don't have a redundant power supply on this 2320, and at this point I'm only using the built-in 4 gigabit Ethernet based PIC, so the 4 gig E interfaces. If I were to go and install in those modular slots, remember we saw those earlier in this Nugget series, on my 2350 or 2320, I've got those modular slots where I can pop in new cards. If I were adding functionality, if we were adding new PICs in there and then initializing the device, when I did show chassis hardware, they would show up here as PIC 1, PIC 2. It depends on what modular slot I place those in, and knowing those modular slots is really different depending upon which platform you have. And when you get the documentation with your router, like my 2350, it gives you what modules are on what device, or on the front of it which module is which, and it really depends. The order is not uniform across all the different Junos platforms, Juniper platforms, so keep that in mind. But again, this is something you might want to know for the exam, and a great thing to know for the real world, because knowing those serial numbers and knowing what PICs are applied to that device is important. So like we're going into Nugget Lab, right? And you want to do inventory on all of your devices. This is a great command to kind of really quickly get an inventory of what kind of modular functionality all of your routers and switches have. Okay, now let's look at a way to see messages that can be seen from the last system boot up. So this is a show command, and it's going to be show system and its boot messages. By the way, there's a bunch of commands we can issue here, obviously, but we're going to do boot messages. Why? Well, look at all the commands here, right? I've got to be very selective to make sure you know certain commands. These are the most important ones, and they're ones that you'll be tested on. So there we can see, and again with the more, so I could obviously pipe this and send it all out. So this is a pretty active set of information here. You get a lot from this, but it's also showing me, just messages that have happened since the boot up process. These are system messages, right? These are not like logging messages like with syslog. These are system generated messages from the operating system, okay, from FreeBSD. That's a good command to know. Now earlier I showed you how to find out alarms on an interface by interface basis, but what if you want to see the system alarms? Well, that would be show system alarms. We have one alarm currently active, and this is telling us that the rescue configuration is not set. That's very interesting, because having a rescue configuration is an extremely important early thing to do on your device. So let's go ahead and do that right now. This is one of those things you really want to do early on when we get a stable operating system. Now I haven't done much configuration, so we're probably going to do this again later on. But we want to have an emergency rescue configuration. And basically it's a known, good, and working configuration that if there's an emergency, if there's something else that's going on, we can just load this up. Now, I'm going to be showing you later on some methods using rollback, but that's in the configuration mode. Okay, we're just in operational mode now. In configuration mode, I've got these rollback capabilities. It's pretty elaborate. It's very cool. It's one of the things I really love about Junos. But here in operational mode, I can load and run a known, stable, and working configuration. But I've got to go ahead and do this. I've got to save one first. So we do this, by the way, in operational mode. So we do this with that command I told you that's kind of unique to Junos. And it's request, I typed in REG as you can tell, request system and the configuration, and we're going to do rescue. Let's do a question mark here. Obviously, we could delete a rescue configuration. That's possible. Or we can save the committed configuration as a rescue configuration. So you know what? Let's go ahead and do that with the save keyword. So rescue, save. And there it is. Okay. By the way, you have to know this on the exam, right? Now, if I wanted to delete the rescue configuration, then the command would be obviously request system configuration rescue delete. Now the rescue configuration is going to be stored in a config directory. So let's do file list, and let's take a look at that config directory, and we can see, there we go, several configurations here. And I mentioned rollback. Okay, we'll be talking about rollback, but these are obviously the changes that have been made. I can roll back to 1, I can roll back 2 changes ago, I can roll back 3 changes ago, right? And here's my rescue config, rescueconfig.gz. Now, if I want to return to my rescue configuration, I need to do that from the configuration mode. Okay, so I don't want to do that right now because I want to stay in operational mode. We're going to be spending most of our time in the configuration mode or the edit mode, right? But I wanted to make sure that you got this. As you can see, there's a lot we can do here in operational mode, and that's why we have a whole nugget dedicated to it. Okay, I just issued a show system processes command. I started doing show processes, but that's one of the downsides to being also a Cisco person, is you do get confused sometimes. But why am I showing you this? Well, number one, there's a bunch of system processes running on this Juniper router. They all have a PID, a process ID. And you can go through here and see all of the, and this is similar to, to going into Task Manager on your Windows system, or, you've got different utilities on your Linux or Sun Solaris system or your Mac OS X system that will show you the processes that are running. This is important because it's quite likely that on your exam, you might be expected to know the kinds of things that are, well, not processes to be specific. But as you go down through it, they're not in alphabetical order, okay? There's a bunch of different processes here. If we move on farther down, you can see a lot of these are, located in the user directory. A lot of these processes are the kinds of things that, are the heart and soul. The HTTP daemon, for example, the SNMP daemon, the PPP daemon. I'll tell you a couple of things that are actually not Junos processes. You might think they are, is the dynamic routing protocols, like Open Shortest Path First, or BGP. Those routing protocols, those are not Junos processes, okay? So you don't have a, OSPF daemon or a BGP daemon process, but you will have things like SNMP. Go up here and see what else. Oh, RPD. So this is the routing protocols daemon. This is a Junos process. SMTP daemon, that's a Junos process, but you're not going to see things for like, BGP, OSPF, RIP, things like that showing up under the Junos system processes. Now, that seems very granular. You might be saying, Michael, that's kind of esoteric. Well, hey, guess what? I'm preparing you for the exam, JNCIA, so don't shoot the messenger. Okay, what else? How about this one? How about show system uptime? Okay, that's a good one. Shows the current time, when the system was booted, the protocols that were started, when it was last configured, and the uptime. That's interesting. Here's one for you. What if you wanted to really rapidly show the administrative status of all of your interfaces on your router? Well, this is a good one to know. Show interfaces terse. Okay. On the Cisco side, the keyword that we usually use to deliver this kind of thing is brief, BRIEF. Over here in the Junos side, it's terse. So show interfaces terse will quickly show just kind of the output of all the interfaces here on my device. Now again, remember, we can do show interfaces terse, and then we could pipe that to no more, right? Remember the pipe symbol? And no more, okay? So don't forget that one, that's kind of cool. What if you wanted to know in operational mode how much space you have available on your storage media on your router? Now we're going to get into file systems and stuff later, but how about show system storage? That makes sense. And you can see kind of the file system, the size of the storage, and if you're a Linux person or a Unix person, this is not going to be any kind of surprise to you, okay? And like I mentioned, it may not hurt for you if you're going to have a future in Juniper and in Junos to maybe do a little bit of side study of Unix, or FreeBSD, for example. But you can see the size, how much is used, how much is available, and the capacity, and actually where it's mounted in the file system. And like I said, we'll get into more file system stuff, but we're just, we're kind of surveying operational mode here. Well, I think that's all the damage I'm going to be able to do in this nugget. Again, don't forget to come in here to operational mode, type in the question mark, and just familiarize yourself. We're going to be coming back here and doing a lot of these things. The last thing I want to show you as I look at this list is, we've talked about a lot of the show commands. We've talked about the ability we can set the date and time, or set the clock, and that's interesting. I showed you a couple of things with the request that we can do. Restart. Let's talk about restart, okay? And interestingly, I'm going to go ahead and finish up here with this command. Let's do a restart and a question mark. A lot of stuff you can restart here, because remember I just showed you all the processes a while ago, show system processes. Well, and you may know this from dealing with an operating system, right? You can stop and start processes. Now as I look at this, for example, like restarting something gracefully, okay, one of the processes gracefully, this reminds me of something that Juniper is really proud of, and I'm excited about it too. It's one of the things that really sets Juniper apart, and it's the fact that The way that their operating system is built is it's built in a modular fashion with different planes, and we're going to talk about that later on. Coming up very quickly, we'll be looking at what we call Juno's software fundamentals, and I'm going to get into the architecture and all that kind of good stuff. It's one of those sidebar nuggets that is kind of theoretical and lecture based, but we need one of those. You know, we can't be in the CLI all the time. But because that it's a modular operating system, these independent processes, they actually run in their own protected memory space, or daemons. And you can individually manage these particular processes or daemons. And that modular capability really makes this a stable platform. It makes it a robust and stable platform. But let me just tell you this, the ability to gracefully restart a process, you got to be very careful, especially if this is a production router that is servicing your entire corporate enterprise, because this can have a dramatic effect on your end users and basically entire domains of your network if you're restarting processes and you don't really understand the implications. Because even if a process runs independently in the operating system, if you were to do something like restarting the SNMP process, that's one thing, okay? You're only going to really deal with reporting and monitoring, right, for SNMP. But if you restart routing, a routing process, I mean, the consequence, it could be a time bomb on your network. You could disrupt routing paths. It can cause reconvergence. It could cause all kinds of issues, okay? And, you know, for things like OSPF, dynamic routing, we'll talk about that later. There's actually other better ways to do this in configuration mode if you're trying to do it on a protocol by protocol basis. As we can see here, we have this, you know, restart capability. And we can restart the auto installation process. We can restart our network security daemon. We can follow it up with a services keyword and then put in a particular service, right? So I want you to know about restart, but I want you to pretty much, you know, avoid it, for the time being, right? Now, as we wrap up here, some of the things we're going to be looking at later on as more advanced topics as we get into this Nugget series is we'll be looking at the file area under operations. We'll be looking at loading information, the monitoring command, and test. Okay, those are very good. So I think that wraps it up for operational mode in this nugget. In part 2, in the nugget to follow this, we're going to go down one level, right? And we know that we can get there by typing in edit, okay? Or if I exit back up, I could type in configure. Either way, gets me in configuration mode. Edit or configure gets me into this mode. And don't forget, the # configuration mode. Exit up, that, you know, greater than symbol is operational mode. Exit up, and there we are with the %. We're back to the shell prompt, and then of course we could exit our way out of the system altogether to get to the login. Well, as my fellow Texan Matthew McConaughey would say, all right, all right, all right. That's user interface options part 1, operational mode. Like I said, in part 2, we'll get into configuration mode. So what did we look at this in this particular nugget here of the JNCIA series? Started out with the easy setup feature. Looked at CLI navigation, some of those Emacs shortcuts, show commands, request commands. Talked about the restart command and restarting services, and that's dangerous. Now, I was going to do a testing takeaway and, you know, kind of so far what have I covered, but let me just tell you, I pretty much integrated this into the entire nugget here. And I mentioned this in the very beginning. Hey, I reserve the right to change my mind and get flexible. So I decided to kind of show you these in the context of where I was. Let me just tell you, everything I showed you in this nugget, part 1, operational mode, is vital, and it's important from a real-world standpoint and a testing standpoint. Okay? So I hope this was informative for you, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did delivering it to you. So keep up the good work, and we'll see you in the next nugget, part 2.